The untold story of Jayne Mansfield's 5 children, a pink mansion under Hollywood lights, a glamorous laugh fading into brake lights down a dark highway. She lived as if caught between stage lights and tragedy. Jayne Mansfield was that brilliance. She was the scream behind the sirens, the joke that lingered too long, the silhouette in sequins, walking through a grocery store at midnight. Tonight, we step into the lives she left behind, not just the fame she wore, but the children who watched her rise, fall, and vanish too soon. Introduction: The Life She Lived. Born Vera Jane Palmer in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, 1933. She entered a world where beauty was currency and tragedy often paid the bill. Her father died when she was just 3. Grief moved in quietly and stayed. Her mother remarried and they settled in Texas. Jayne was a dreamer with a violin case. She spoke 5 languages, studied Shakespeare, and carried an IQ many never believed belonged to a blonde bombshell. At 17, she married Paul Mansfield. Soon after came her first daughter, but the domestic world was too small for the size of her dreams. She packed her baby and headed west. Hollywood greeted her with raised eyebrows and open cameras. She posed, she plotted, she performed, and in a flash, Jayne Mansfield became a name people didn't forget. The Girl Can't Help It turned her into a star. Playboy made her a sensation, but behind every headline, there was always a phone call home, a bedtime story, a kiss. She had 5 children, each born from different chapters of her chaotic journey, each shaped by the woman the world only thought it knew. She wasn't just a starlet, she was a mother who baked cookies in mink slippers, who sang lullabies in 7 languages, who once painted her entire mansion pink just to make her children smile. Then came the crash in 1967, Louisiana. She was just 34. Her children survived, but everything else was scattered like ash across the pages of Hollywood. They were left not with answers, but with headlines and silence. This is their story. Jayne Marie Mansfield, born November 8, 1950. Jayne Marie was born before the glitter, before the mansion, the lions, the headlines. Before her mother became Mansfield, she was the first, and for a while the only one, a daughter clinging to a mother who was still just Vera, still learning how to be a woman and a dreamer at the same time. In those early years, they were a team. Jayne Marie slept beside her mother on buses, on trains, in cheap hotels. She watched her mother become someone else, blonder, louder, more desired, and then, finally, famous. The Pink Palace was a fairy tale from the outside, but from the inside, Jayne Marie saw the cracks, the shouting behind doors, the stream of stepfathers, the mother who smiled wide for the world and quietly unraveled at night. She rebelled. She ran. She came back and left again. When Jayne died, Jayne Marie was only 16. She'd spent her last years pulling away, but nothing prepares a child for that kind of silence. She posed for Playboy at 17. The first daughter of a centerfold to do so. It was part rebellion, part reclamation. She didn't become a star, but she spoke. In interviews, in documentaries, she told the truth about her mother, the brilliant parts, the broken ones, and she built her own family, a quiet life, one not written in headlines but in healing. Jayne Marie didn't run from the shadow. She walked through it, and somehow she emerged whole. She's spoken candidly about the pain, the fame, the fantasy, the fractured family beneath the facade. She's revisited her childhood through interviews, documentaries, and memoir projects, always returning to one central theme: complexity. Her mother wasn't just a bombshell. She was a woman with layers, with intelligence, with insecurities. In her later years, Jayne Marie took steps to preserve the family story, not through sequins and glitter, but through raw honesty. She visited the Pink Palace before it was demolished. She fought to protect her mother's image. She raised her own children with a different rhythm, less performance, more presence. And when she speaks of Jayne today, it's not with bitterness, it's with tenderness, not with reverence, but with recognition. Because Jayne Marie knew the woman behind the icon, and that's the legacy she chose to carry. Miklos Mickey Hargitay Jr., born December 21st, 1958. Mickey Hargitay Jr. was born into a photo spread. The cameras were already rolling. His mother, a movie star. His father, a champion bodybuilder. He was their first shared legacy, a child born into a castle made of pink bricks and flashbulbs. At the Pink Palace, every moment had the potential for publicity. Birthday parties had guest lists and press. Trips to the grocery store came with autograph seekers. Mickey learned to smile on cue, to behave in front of photographers, but behind the scenes, he was just a boy, a son watching his parents come together and then fall apart. The Pink Palace was more than pink walls and velvet curtains. It was chaos disguised as celebration, and Mickey Jr., quiet and observant, began building an inner world, one with fewer cameras and more calm. When his parents divorced, the palace lost its shine. The home grew quieter, colder. Jayne filled the space with distractions, new men, new shoots, new performances. But Mickey saw the wear, the tired in her eyes. He loved her, still. He always would. But he started to retreat into silence, into his own world. Then came the night that changed everything. 1967, a car crash, a headline, and suddenly, no more mother, just the memory of her voice and the echo of cameras. Mickey survived the crash, physically, at least. He was just 8. But part of him stayed on that road. As an adult, Mickey chose a different life. He didn't chase the spotlight. He found beauty in growing things, plants, soil, sunlight. He opened a nursery in Los Angeles. Visitors described him as kind, quiet, grounded, a man who once belonged to Hollywood royalty, now happiest among orchids and shade. He doesn't speak much of his past, and he doesn't need to. The peace he built speaks for him. He's watched his siblings take different paths, some into acting, others into reflection. But Mickey, he stayed rooted, literally. He tends to plants like memories, with patience, with care. He builds something new from the soil of what was lost. Mickey Hargitay Jr. is not a name you see in tabloids, but he carries a legacy all the same, in silence, in soil, in survival. He is the quiet gardener of a once glamorous lineage, a man who turned the chaos of childhood into a life that grows toward light. Zoltán Hargitay, born August 1st, 1960. Zoltán David Hargitay was born into the surreal kingdom of Hollywood royalty. By the time he arrived, his parents, Jayne Mansfield and Mickey Hargitay, were already fixtures in gossip columns and movie magazines. He was born into a house of mirrors where every corner reflected fame and fracture. He was the middle child, quiet, tender, a boy who found solace in silence, even as flashbulbs popped in every room. A boy who found solace in silence, even as flashbulbs popped in every room. He had the same opulent childhood as his siblings, the heart-shaped pool, the exotic pets, the long corridors of the Pink Palace lined with photos of his mother, but his story took a darker turn. In 1966, when he was just 6 years old, Zoltán was attacked by a lion at Jungle Land, USA, a theme park designed for family fun, promoted with photo ops and Hollywood smiles. The lion turned without warning, mauling Zoltán with its jaws. He suffered critical injuries to his head, neck, and back. News outlets called it a tragedy. His mother called it a betrayal. Jayne dropped everything, every film role, every photo shoot. She stayed at his bedside, sang to him, cried when no one watched. He survived. Barely. The scars healed. But trauma doesn't always leave marks you can see. As he grew, Zoltán pulled further away from the spotlight. He didn't perform, didn't pose. He found his place behind the scenes. A film technician, a set builder, a man who helped create illusions without stepping into them. In Hollywood, his name rarely appeared in credits, but those who worked with him remembered him. Focused, kind, quiet. He avoided interviews, turned down documentaries, refused to perform grief for an audience. To this day, Zoltán lives mostly out of sight. No Instagram, no tell-all. Just a life lived on his own terms. He is the quiet resistance to a legacy of excess. Of all Jayne's children, Zoltán may be the one who truly walked away from fame, not in anger, but in wisdom. He carries no torch, makes no claims, but his silence speaks volumes. He is the unsung guardian of a legacy he never asked for, a survivor of not just a lion, but of a life too loud for most children to bear. He didn't inherit the screen, he inherited the stillness, and in that stillness he found peace. Mariska Hargitay, born January 23, 1964. Mariska was born during the final flicker of Jayne Mansfield's fame. By the time she entered the world, the spotlight was starting to shift, the smiles were harder won, and the glamour more performative than ever. She was Jayne's youngest daughter, a late-born symbol of hope, a bridge between fractured love and desperate legacy. Her early years were wrapped in pink satin and silver clatter. Camera bulbs, party streamers, press at the door. But behind the noise, there were quiet moments, too. Jayne reading her poetry, singing lullabies, whispering foreign phrases in her baby's ear. Then came the crash. 1967. Mariska was in the car, 3 years old, asleep in the back seat. She survived, but her mother did not. Raised by her father, Mickey, Mariska grew up without a living memory of Jayne. Only echoes, photographs, magazine clippings, rumors. She became a woman haunted by someone she never truly knew, yet shaped by her absence. As she stepped into adulthood, she didn't run toward the legacy. She walked beside it, carefully, with purpose. She studied acting, worked tirelessly, until finally she found her own name, not in scandal, but in strength. Olivia Benson. Law and Order Special Victims Unit, a role that would define a generation. A detective, a protector, a survivor. Off-screen, she founded the Joyful Heart Foundation, a sanctuary for those broken by violence, a place of healing for the voiceless. In doing so, she became the opposite of her mother's image, no longer the sex symbol, now the symbol of compassion. In time, she sought to understand her mother. She made a documentary, My Mom, Jayne. She spoke to family, dug through archives, searched for a woman behind the bombshell. What she found was complexity, joy, sadness, a mother who loved deeply but lived chaotically. She also discovered that entertainer Nelson Sardelli, not Mickey, might be her biological father, a truth that never shook her loyalty, because Mickey raised her, and love is more than blood. Today, Mariska is a wife, a mother, a beacon. She carries the name Hargitay with a dignity carved from hardship. She honors her mother in every choice she makes, not with glitter, but with grit, not through performance, through purpose. Mariska Hargitay didn't just survive fame, she transformed it. Antonio Tony Cimber, born 1965, Tony was the last, the final child of Jayne Mansfield, born into the dimming light of her legend, the fame fading, the headlines growing colder, the house quieter. His father was director Matt Cimber. The marriage was short, the relationship volatile. By the time Tony was born, Jayne was already stretched thin, a mother trying to hold together a world that kept breaking. He was barely 2 when she died, too young to remember her laugh, her perfume, her voice. What he inherited wasn't presence, it was myth, photographs, documentaries, a house no longer standing, but remembered in tabloids and television specials. Tony grew up hearing her name more than he ever heard her speak it. Raised mostly by his father, he was the only one of the Mansfield children who had to discover his mother entirely through others. As an adult, Tony dabbled in the family business, appearing in small acting roles, working as a director and producer on niche television projects, but he never pursued fame, not the way Jayne had, not the way Hollywood wanted him to. His career stayed quiet, his life even quieter. Tony became a father himself, and that, more than anything, redefined his story, because when you lose a parent before memory, you build your identity not through inheritance, but through choice. He chose stability, privacy, purpose. He didn't write memoirs, didn't walk red carpets, didn't revisit the mansion where it all began. But in interviews, rare though they are, he speaks of Jayne with a kind of reverence only children of absence truly understand. He says her eyes looked kind in pictures, that she seemed funny, warm, creative. He wonders what she might have been like if she had lived to see him grow, to hear him speak, to see what kind of man he became. Antonio Tony Simber represents not the stardust Jayne scattered across the world, but the quiet after it settled. He is the closing chapter of her story, the final note of a song that ended too soon. And though he never heard her sing, he carries the melody still. They are not just children of a star. They are survivors of spectacle, sculptors of memory. They have grown old, while their mother remains young in photographs, forever 34, forever smiling. Their lives force us to ask, what does it mean to inherit a legacy built on image? How do you grow in the shadow of someone who lit up the world, then vanished? Jayne's children show us that fame doesn't guarantee understanding, that trauma can echo across generations, but so can resilience. Some chose the spotlight, some chose silence, but each of them found a way to live with what was left behind. They remind us that a famous mother doesn't guarantee a glamorous life, and that survival is often the quietest kind of strength. Their story is not about celebrity, it's about endurance, memory, and the lives quietly lived behind the loudest headlines. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more untold stories of the children behind the icons. Comment below whose legacy should we uncover next, and share this with someone who remembers the pink palaces and silver screens, or someone who believes that behind every spotlight there's a heartbeat worth hearing, because the story never really ends, it just waits for someone to listen.